Hello? Hey everybody! Welcome to StashBlaster Quilts. I'm Maria Spitalnik, and I am here to help you sew more quilts in less time where maybe you don't have all the skills you want yet, so you can build them doing some very simple quilting. So we've been talking about the quilt behind me, and last session, which was the third Wednesday of the month, last month, I talked about how to fold your yardage and your quarter yards and get them stored very neatly on your shelving and save some space and things like that. Well, today we're going to talk about your processed pieces. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it could be your scraps, but it could also be at the end of making a quilt. You have leftover fabric. And so what you want to do before it gets all wrinkled by being thrown into a drawer or something, I like to go ahead and get it cut into basic units that I know I'm going to use, and then I store them neatly so that I don't have to iron them again. I really don't like ironing. It's just one of those things for me. So the less of it that I can do, the better. I don't mind pressing, but ironing yardage, it drives me crazy after a while. So since it's already ironed and ready to go from when I was cutting it, I will go ahead and process it down into smaller pieces. Now, don't do this until your quilt top is completely finished. You've checked it over to make sure there aren't any mistakes that you're going to want to correct, and you're ready to move forward. Because I will promise you that if you cut those scrap materials too soon, you're going to need a piece just a little bigger than the largest piece you cut. And then you're going to not be liking me very much at all. So please don't do that. So what do I do with my fabric? The first thing I think of are strips. Now for me, a strip needs to be at least 12.5 inches long to qualify as a strip. Why 12.5? Because I have a 12.5 inch ruler. So I can plop it down on the piece. If it's at all short of that mark, it's going to get subcut even further. But if it is 12.5 inches or longer, it's going to go in my strip drawers. I don't care what the width is. I do cut a lot of different sizes because I want to get every inch out of that material that I can. That's not feasible for most people, okay? My strips go up to 6.5 inches wide, and I do every half inch from 1 inch on up. But you don't need to do that. What you first need to do is think about what size strips do you like to use? Do you like to use jelly rolls? Cut everything at 2.5. If you like to use charm packs along with your strips, well then maybe some 5s to go along with those. So think about how you quilt first. If you're a brand spanking new quilter, then 2.5 is a good solid size to work with. Okay? So you're going to want to cut selvage to selvage with the fabric as many strips as you can. Now the way I do it is I start with the largest strips first and I work my way down, because it never works out that I wind up with a completely rectangular piece at the end. And remember, if it's longer than 9 inches and it's full selvage to selvage, that's going to go with my quarter yards anyway. So it's going to be kind of wonky and kind of weird. So you cut what strips you can. I start with the largest and I work my way down. Then with the pieces that are less than 12.5, I cut them into bricks and blocks. Now I got this from Bonnie Hunter. Thank you so much, Bonnie, if you ever see this. And the nice thing about that is then I already have pieces ready to sew at any time, no matter if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I just want to do something. I can do it. And I make 4 patches and flying geese and 9 patches and square and all kinds of other things just at random, simply because I then use those in other quilts later. I will say that a square and a square is a little bit different than the other ones that I mentioned. Well, 9 patches too, to think about it. But your 4 patches, your flying geese, your half square triangles, and your quarter square triangles, if you make those, you can always cut them down if you need another one for some design that you've created. Square in a square 9 patch, you really can't cut down very far. So I tend to not make those as often, but every once in a while I'll be in a mood and that's what I make. So I mentioned my strip drawers. So now I'm going to switch over here to the other camera. Oops, that one. And you can see this set of drawers I have here. Okay? And so in the drawers, I have my pre-cut strips that I've made. I do put them in neatly. I know some people who like to just jumble them in, because if you do that, you can kind of see some color play a little bit better. But again, I don't want to iron. So that's what I do with the strips. And so they go into these drawers. If it's smaller than a strip, I'm going to angle this up a little bit. Here we go. I use these drawers. Now they make them wider because my squares I cut from 1 inch to 12.5 inches. But these are all labeled. It's like 2.5, 3, 3.5. So all of these squares are the same size. So anytime I want to make a 4 patch, or if I have a pattern that calls for those sizes, I may already have pre-cut everything I need to make that quilt. And then there's bricks. Now this is normally in one of these, okay? But I've just pulled it out so you can see. Now these are bricks. These are a little bit different. These are the size you need if you were making flying geese using the rectangle and square method. Okay? Now, the reason that I made these, though, is not because I make that many flying geese using that method. Partially because there's a lot of wastage, or by the time you get down to this size and you add your 2 triangles on, the leftover triangles are trash at that point. And I don't like doing that. But there's other things you can do with these bricks. So this is a traditional pattern called hopscotch. I didn't know that when I created this. I thought that I had come up with this really cool thing. So this goes to tell you everything old is new again. But this is hopscotch. Okay. Now this was done as, hold on, let me see if I can get it here so you can see it better, as a leader and ender quilt. So I sewed this 2 blocks at a time. So if you can see here, let me change cameras again. It might be easier to see. Dang it. Okay, here we go. All right, let me push this down like this. Okay, so this is one of the blocks right here. Okay, the purple and the green. So that made a block. Then I sewed a purple and this white with flowers. That's another square. And then I just had to put all the squares together going across. Now, the hardest thing about this quilt is the layout. Okay? And that's where something like your design wall comes in really handy. I started this with a portable design wall. I didn't have the monster I have behind me now when I started. I was using just a couple of pieces of foam that I had found. To be honest, a neighbor had bought a giant screen TV, and when he threw out all the packaging, I looked and there were these great big fat pieces of foam on the side where the screen was, and so I nicked it. And so I used those and I covered them in flannel, and I used those for a number of years. But I've graduated to my full wall design wall that we talked about in the past, and so I don't use those anymore. But I did this, and what was nice is that just like most leaders and enders, you want to use it in between rows of other work, etc. that you're doing. Well, what I would do is I would put that board that I had the pieces laid out on next to me on my left. And then on my right, I had the quilt that I was working on. And so I would run my whole row through, and then I could just grab any pair that I wanted off of this wall and put them through. And at the end of the day, I could see right where they were because I was marching my way across, right? And so I could put them back. And so I just grew and grew and grew. And then there was one day when all the squares had been done, and then some of the 4 patches, because I went from squares to 4 patches to 16 patches, because I did it in chunks rather than trying to do a whole row, because that's a lot of seams to try to keep straightened out. So I did it in chunks, And then one day I said, you know what? I think that we're done. And at this point, I spent about an hour. I assembled all my big chunks together, and the whole center of this quilt was done. And then I just put my outer border on, and then a fun piece of binding that I had that had lots of colors in it, because obviously the middle has tons of color. And so I wanted to tie back into that. And then I took it to one of my guildmates and had her quilt it. Now, just in case you were interested, because I know some of you don't know how to pick your patterns for quilting yet. What I did is I had her, let me see where I am here. Okay. Just do about a half of the way into each rectangle and then back through the point. And so she did this, and it's called an apple core quilting pattern. It was not on the computer. She did this freehand. But the nice thing I thought about it is it made it feel like this was swirling, so that all these pinwheels were in motion. And then I had her do something called matchstick quilting. Let's see if I can find an angle where you can see this better. Ah, here we go. So if you look here, these are little tiny rows of quilting that she did. And so that really set it off. Now I did learn something with that. Let me see if I can find a good one. Sometimes the red color, particularly red, I don't know why, that shows through with the matchstick quilting. None of the other colors did, but the red did. So now I know that if I was going to be doing this, I would make sure that I pressed this particular seam back towards the pinwheels. But I didn't know that at the time. So I was just trying to keep it as flat as possible, which is why I pressed towards the outer edge in this case. So I have learned something. You get to benefit from it. And then on the outside here, the quilting that we picked kind of made me think of wind blowing. So we've got the wind blowing out here, spinning the pinwheels in here. So that's how we picked the quilting pattern that we picked. You can do anything you want, obviously. But I know that sometimes I get stuck and I can't think of how I want to quilt something. So I wanted to walk you through the way that Robin and I picked the choices for this to maybe give you an idea on the quilt that you're doing. Now we've been working on the quilt behind me, kind of as a sew along here. And in this case, this is just sewn with really quick little zoop-de-zoop loops. Again, these quilts are for charity, so they are perfect for practicing any technique that you want to do. So feel free to try anything. But I'm just telling you what I'm doing in case you're curious or want to do the same thing. All right, I'm going to move these drawers out of the way, and then we're going to talk about the blue and white version of this that we've been working on. Nope, sorry about that. I lost my transmitter part here, or receiver part, whatever it is, you know what I mean. All right. Now, oh, wrong button, sorry. Now in this case, I cut the strips smaller than we did in the original. The original, these are cut at 12.5. Why 12.5? Because my ruler's 12.5. In this particular case, I cut them at 6.5. Because some of my strips, by the time I squared everything up, were less than the 12.5 inches that I wanted. On the green version, I cut it to 11. But I decided with this one, because I was going to have red strips in between, I wanted more red. So I cut the strips smaller. Now some of these, I got 2 out of the same strip set. So you'll notice this one is the same as this one. I just flipped it over. Okay? A recipient isn't going to know. They're not going to care. Okay? So if there's a couple of them that repeat because you're only making one of something, that's perfectly fine. Don't feel like you have to stress over it. Just flip it. I did put it up on my design wall for a couple of reasons. Number one, I wanted to confirm how many strips I wanted to include, and I wanted to double check it. And that's when I found out that there was a problem. Now, can you see it? This strip set is 1 too short. Okay? So by putting it on my wall, I didn't start sewing stuff together and then realize, oh no, it's short. Have to pick out a piece, splice in the next 2 pieces, then sew it, trim it, da 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 da. So I always just plop it up real quick just to see and make sure that it's going to be okay. So looking at it here, I do have these strips closer together than they're going to be. They're going to be this far apart because I'm going to put another 2.5-inch strip in between, but I wanted to see them close together because one thing I wanted to be sure of is that I didn't wind up somehow with one long strip most of the way down that was all the same value. I didn't want a super light row, a column, or a super dark column. And so I played around with it. Now, honestly, what I did is I set the pairs. I put one at the top, one either in the middle or the bottom, so I spaced them out. I took the single rows that I had, I put those in. I probably played with this for no more than 5 minutes. Again, it's a charity quilt. Don't worry about perfection. We don't care about the perfection. We want happy. I don't have a huge block of dark. This is about the worst it gets here. Okay? And I got a little bit of a patch of light here. But in general, I'm seeing that it's fairly well balanced. Here, since I have a light and a fairly dark medium color and a dark, I'll probably put something that's in the light to medium phase here because I'm going to be picking a specific strip to make this one set from. So the next thing to do is the red strips. But how big do you cut them? And how many do you need? And do you want to cut width the fabric or do you want to cut length the fabric? We're going to talk about that next. So let's come back on over to the machine. Because what I'm hoping to do here is show you my very expensive, highly in-depth method, there it is, for figuring this stuff out. Okay, so let me get this centered up here so we can see it. There we go, that's better. Now, I need to turn it so everything's right side up for you. Ah, there we go. I've got the cord wrapped around this thing like it's some sort of strange harp. Oh, too far. Here we go. Okay. I know this is kind of wonky to me, but I'm hoping that this stays working okay for you. So what I did was I first drew my strips going across this way. And as you can see over here, I did end each row with white. Okay? So I have 13 colored strips and 14 white strips. Okay? And so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows. And I only have 7 drawn here, but that's okay because I wanted to do this with you. With this being 13 pairs plus 1, that means I have 27 strips across. From edge here to edge here. They're both 2 inches though. They're all 2 inches. So that's times 2 is 54 inches. Don't forget I haven't sewn these on yet. So these are a ½ inch, quarter inch on each end bigger. So a ½ inch total. So I added my ½ inch back in. These red strips here are going to be 54 and a half. Okay. Now I showed here, these are my seam lines. So this red strip up here is also going to be 54 and a half, but it's going to be 6 inches finished or 6.5 wide to start. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So when I'm drawing this, let me get my pencil out. I don't worry about filling in all of it. I usually do 1 or 2 rows when it's repetitious like this. And then just enough so that I'm sure of what I'm doing, because then I have room to make notes on the side. So let me get my pencil going. Okay. So, like I said, and I'm going to double check my count. I have 8 strips. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Now, I'm going to just I'm going to color in a couple of blues. Now, my quilt has tons of different shades of blue. For this, though, it doesn't matter. This is more just a layout chart. This is not going to be anything where I'm worried about the actual color placement or anything like that. If you have a quilt pattern program. Um, one that I use is EQ7, but there's several of them out there. There's Pro Quilt. There's a bunch of other ones. Um, you can go ahead and lay this out. In this case, I would probably just pick one blue color just to test this out and then worry about it later. Okay, so now I'm going to just color this intersection. Again, we're going to do 6 inches finish down here. Each of these blocks is 2 inches. Okay, so how do I figure the length of the sashing for my vertical? Because we already know all the horizontal sashing numbers, right? It's going to be 54 and a half, like you see here. Now, the best option is to wait. And when you have the rest of this assembled, then you can go ahead and put on outer sashing. Now, in this case, I didn't add an outer border. So all I had to do was have this horizontal strip go all the way to the edge, and then I put on the binding. But in this particular case, with the red and white and blue quilt, I do want a nice, big, fat, chunky outside border. So I'm going to have to do some calculations for that. So let's get back to the board. Now, the math. It's not that hard. People get scared of quilt math. It's not hard. We're first going to start with our finish sizes because we're going to do this whole section from here to here. Okay? So, these are 6 inches. This is 6 inches. That makes it really easy. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 6-inch strips. Okay? Then these are 2-inch strips. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 2-inch strips. Okay? Now, because I get nervous about this, I add them all up again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Yep, I got them all. I didn't miss anything. Okay? Now, 10 times 6 equals 60 inches. 7 times 2 equals 14. So my length is going to be 74 plus 1/2. Because remember, we have our seam allowance here, and we have our seam allowance here. That's our 1/2 inches. So 74 and a half. Now, when you're doing this properly, you would measure, once you had it assembled, measure each end and the middle, take the average, cut your outer two border strips, your outer two border strips to that length, and then put one on each side. And you would ease it in to make sure that if there's a little extra or a little too little, that you can make that fit properly. This number is our working number for figuring out our material. Okay? Now, in this particular case, this is our longest measurement. Okay? I like to add a little bit extra onto that. So, let me, sorry, you're seeing my YouTube on there. I watch a show called Scammer Payback. And what he does is he gets those guys that either call or email you that are scamming you, and he gets them on the phone, and he wastes their time, which is great, and then he tries to get information on them so that they can track them down. And apparently it's a big thing in India right now where they're going after these guys, and he gives them the information that they need. And so he also speaks Hindi and a couple of other languages, so when they're yapping in the background and saying things about people, he can translate that and put that out there for us to see. But he shows all the different ways that they try to manipulate people in order to get their money. And it's amazing how they can get people to do some of the stuff that they can. And so I do like to watch him because it's kind of fun to watch these scammers try to work him, and we know, and he knows what they're doing, and he just takes them around and around and around and around and really irritates them. So that's what you were seeing. Anyway, let's get back to the math. Okay, let me flip that back over. Okay, so 74.5 inches. Now, if I were to take that, let me bring up my calculator here. Come on. Calculator. Okay, I don't know if you can see. Okay, so 74.5 divided by 12. I don't know if I can make it so you can see that. No, I lost it. Hold on. I'm really not this incompetent, I promise you. Okay. It's the camera angles I'm trying to get here. Okay, so I know it's kind of weird, but you can see it says 6.2 feet. Okay? Because when we talked about how the fabric is stored on my shelf, it's rolled in 6-inch increments. So I can easily see how many feet of red I have of that particular color. So I don't have to keep unrolling and re-rolling my material, which saves a lot of time folding and refolding. In this particular case, I personally prefer not to piece the sashing if I can avoid it, simply because that uses up fabric that I don't need to use, and also it's a time saver. Okay? If you need to do this, that's perfectly fine. You'll know what sizes to cut your width of fabric. You will join them on the bias. If you don't know how to do that, and you want me to show you, put a note in the comments. But you'll sew that on the bias, and now you'll at the end of that, then you will trim it down to the proper size. Okay? In my case, I don't want to have to do that, and I've got so much fabric behind here that I know I've got pieces that I can cut long enough that I won't have to piece anything. Now, what will I do with the parts that are left over? I'm going to cut it down into strips and bricks and blocks. Mostly strips and blocks. I don't do a ton of bricks, but every once in a while I do. And I do set limits. My strips are no wider than 6.5. My blocks are no bigger than 12.5. And my bricks are no more than 6.5 on the long side, because they start getting unwieldy and way too large to easily work with if you cut those bricks too large. Unless your goal is to make bricks and turn them into a backing, or you want to use them in your main quilt design. If that's something you like using big bricks for, and to do something like an I Spy or something like that, it's wonderful for that, because if it's 6.5 inches wide, then it's 3.5 tall. You can get some really good pictures in that in order to make it work. So if that's where you want to go with it, go for it. But me personally, I don't go any wider than the 6.5 on the long side on my bricks. Okay, sorry, back to the math. So since we're looking at 6 feet, that's just over 2 yards. It's 2¼ yards. So I'm going to make a note down here, 2¼ yards. Now, what am I going to do with that? Let me peel this off. The normal bolt of fabric is somewhere between 42 and 44 inches wide. So, just so that you have an idea here. Obviously, I don't draw straight lines very well. I apologize for that. So, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That's 40. So let's say 42, just to be on the safe side. What's the worst that's going to happen? We're going to have some extra fabric that we will have as a 2-inch strip. Not bad, okay? Now, these strips are 6 inches wide, which means they're really 6.5. Now, these are all 3 inches each, so I'm actually going to mark it as 7, just because that makes it easier for me to be sure that I get all of my strips across. Okay? Now, I know I need 74 and a half. That's 35, 36, 37 and change long blocks. 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. Okay. So, just so you have an idea here, okay? So this is going to be 75 inches this way, and we've got 42 or 44 this way. Okay, I hope that all makes sense. So the first strip, 7 inches. Second strip, 7 inches. Now, if I'm really concerned, maybe I add another couple inches down here, just to make sure for my math. But in this case, I'm pretty confident with my 74 and a half. But if you wanted to make it 76 or more, you could. Keeping in mind that's more you're going to subcut, and it's going to be more fabric that you're going to lose. Okay, so these are my two long side borders. Times 2. Okay? Now, I need my short side borders, here to here. And that's going to be 54. Actually, I misdrew that. It's off, but that's okay. The math is the important part. So, I will go 10, 20, 30, 40, 54. Okay. Again, we're going to do 3.5 and 3.5. Now, because we know that this sashing is the same length, I'm just going to go ahead and draw this line all the way across. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these long strips first. Okay? And then I will cut across at the length here for the 54.5. Okay? So I've got my two short side border here. And then I've got 2.5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Uh-oh. I only have 4 here, and I need 7. Okay? So this is a situation where I'm going to have to piece. Now, if you're making a whole bunch of these quilts, you're going to have a longer strip, you'll have fewer to piece. But, excuse me. This is going to give me my 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, here I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26 to 28 inches. Okay? Now, if I take the 26 times 2, that's not quite enough to hit my 54. That's only 52 inches. So this piece isn't going to cut it. Another solution would be to cut everything with and do your piecing. Personally, what I would probably do is I'm not going to do my 75. I'm going to go a little bit longer. And then I'm going to cut my excess pieces this way. So this is going to give me number 5, 6, and 7. Okay. We know that these are longer. We know that these are all going to be 42 inches. We add that onto these. And we've got plenty of excess. I hope that wasn't too confusing. because if I take 54.5 minus 42, that's going to give me 12.5 is all I need extra. And there's plenty of extra in this block. You could cut it either way. So if you want more of a square left, cut your 2.5s this way. If you want to have longer strips in your drawer, you cut them this way. So since I'm going to need these 3, I'm going to be adding 2, 4, 6, and a half is 7.5 is 7.5 inches. I didn't line that up for you very well at all, did I? I'm sorry about that. Okay, so the original size was 75. So that's 82.5. Will give us plenty of material here for all of the sashing, for all the horizontals and all the verticals. Now, in this particular quilt, you can either piece on the diagonal like this in your sashing, or you can piece on the vertical. The only problem with doing the vertical is if it lines up with your other strips, then you're going to have a little bit of an issue of which way is it flopping. So you're going to want to line that up a little bit better than you might otherwise if you're worried about perfection. If you're not, let it fall wherever it falls. But if it happens to line up, then you may have a little bit bulkier of a seam. But you know what? That's okay. All right? So I personally would go ahead and do it on the diagonal, and I would probably sew them all together into one long strip and then cut them to the 54.5 and then assemble them that way. Now, why would I put them all in one strip first? I would sew those great big long ones, the 42 or 44 inch ones, and then I would sew the long strips the other way and put that diagonal seam in. And then what I want to do is make sure that seam is not just at the end of a row. I want it to be in the middle somewhere. So if it's going to be, let's say, right here, okay, I'm not going to want that. So I will scooch it over enough that I can get a couple of blocks out of the end of that, and I'll trim it up, and then start it back here. So what's going to happen is that my diagonal will wind up being out this way, okay, by moving it over. And so it's a little bit less of a problem when you have to deal with your binding later. Because if you have your diagonal seam right here, then you're going to have extra thickness right where that diagonal hits your outer border. And so, well, yes, in this case it's not binding, it's the border. But either way, you're still going to have that problem. Okay? So I like to make sure that we don't do that, because it can be hard to get over that hump without having a big joggle in the edge you have here, or in this particular case, where your border attaches. I hope that all makes sense. If some of this doesn't, please let me know, because what sounds right in my head may not be coming out the way I'm intending it to. And I want to make sure that everybody understands what I'm talking about. So by sewing my long strips to my longer ones of these, so this one, and we know this is plenty big enough because this is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26 or 28 inches long. And we only need 12.5. Okay? That's going to let me stagger those diagonals here in my quilt. So I can have one here, then maybe one here. I wouldn't go any further over than that. And so by shifting them, you're not going to have this whole row of them going down in an order, which can be distracting, because then it starts to look more like a design feature. But you can piece it in like this. Now, you don't have to do all one color. So I talked about this last time. Let me bring this one over. And switch cameras. Here we go. So this quilt is just a red and white. I do this as a class sample. So this is a case where I made my strip set, well, it's not going to stick to that quilt. Hold on. Let me just do this. Because I sit in front of this, it tends to fall down. The flannel isn't quite enough to hold on to it. So I do have 2 pins, so I'm just going to move those over. Okay. So here's one of the strip sets that I made. But you can see that even here in the sashing, can you see? I think so. This strip here. These are 2 different colors completely. Okay? And so what I did was I went ahead and I pasted them, and then I put those together so that you've got your colored strips are all different, and then things in the cream and white family go together. Let's see if camera 3 can pick it up a little bit better. Hold on. It's maybe upside down. Yep, it is upside down. But can you see? It might be a little bit easier to see here. This one and this one. Okay. So here's another one over here. That one's a little bit easier to see here. So you don't have to have one color for your, here we go. I'm upright again. There we go. You don't have to have just the one color even as your background. You could vary that up. And so by putting in the diagonal seam, you not only are going to have that bulk problem solved, but it's also going to add a little bit of other interest to it. Now this strip set will be cut into chunks, just like the others, but these seams are going to show up at different places. Alright? Okay, so let me switch back to my normal camera. Here we go. Alright, so I hope that that kind of explains it. Let me get this one back over here. So that's the idea, okay? And so what I do is with the black and white, I press everything to the black. When it's some sort of light color and a darker color as my color strips, I'll press towards the color strip. Now the nice thing about me going to the red, let me see if I can make this work. Here. Okay, I think we're upside down and weird again. Yep, I'm upside down again, so hold on. I promise you, I'm not trying to make anybody sick here. Okay. In this case, my seams are pressed to the color, like this. And what my preference would normally be, would be to press towards the color again if this was white. But since I'm going with red, I can leave this seam allowance on this side. So this is going to lie flatter than if I had to double this up by having this edge go under where this side is already from my pressing of the actual strip sets. So that's another reason why I'm going with the red here. On the green quilt, I'm going white. So I will be pressing the green strips back on themselves. Okay? So I hope that that all made sense. So that's what we're doing this time for the StashBlaster quilts. I wanted to make sure that I did some math for you in case you wanted to do something a little bit different. So that is that. So for anybody who's interested, I was telling you that this week I was getting an MRI. Now, I don't know what happened in the universe on Monday, but Monday was just against me altogether. It was one of those days when you start thinking that just somebody's got it out for you. So the first thing is that I had a doctor's appointment. Now, I told the nurse when I booked it that I wanted an in-person appointment, but she said, no, we were going to do virtual. I said, okay. So she set it up. Well, she set it up with my old OB, not the one that I had seen. So, okay. So now I've got a problem. Now I have to reschedule, and my current OB is not available until September. I was supposed to see her in like 30 to 40 days from the last time I saw her, but no. So that didn't happen. Okay, fine. So then I drove to a client's, and unfortunately her husband was in the hospital. She had called, but I had missed the call, so I drove my hour out there, and she wasn't available. She had to cancel. So I said, okay. And I called my next appointment, and she was able to see me early. So that's the one thing that went well. So I saw the next client, and that's when she told me that she had been putting things on a list for keep in her home because she's never going to be able to go back home. So I was setting aside the items that she said that she wanted to keep and getting everything boxed up and everything so that we could go ahead and sell or donate the items that were left. And she said, no, she's really going to sell it, but she just didn't want me to sell it all at once because she was afraid I was going to glut the market. So she said she wanted to keep it. So some of these items over time I've seen 4 and 5 times as she keeps changing her mind. So that was kind of a rough conversation to have because she also doesn't really have any funds that are extra to do this with. So I'd explained to her that she needs to make these decisions once, and she got all mad at me, so that wasn't very nice for my day. But it happens. So, we kind of moved on from there, and by the end, we were all copacetic again. So I left her, and I went to get the MRI. Now, I've been having some vertigo, and so they were doing this part of my head. They wanted my ears and, some of the brain and all of that. And so, of course, my husband said, that they're going to do the MRI, and there's just going to be a whole big empty in there. And I was like, thank you so much. But I kind of had to agree with him, too, because I was kind of flighty at the time when he said it. But anyway, so I go in to do the MRI. And I had on the mask that I had made, and it has this real big, thick piece of metal. And I told the tech about it, and he said, no, that's fine. We're going to put it way over here, and I'm going to give you a mask without any metal. Okay, that's fine. And then they give you earplugs, and then they give you headphones because the machine is really loud. And so I was trying to be calm, and they get the machine all up and going, and all of a sudden there's this big BAM! My mask had flown all the way across the room and stuck to the side of the machine. And so I got startled, and he got startled. And so he's like, no, it's all fine. It's fine. We'll get it down later. I'm like, okay. So I'm in there. Now, I haven't had an MRI in a very long time. And so I'm laying there, and I'm trying to be calm and zen and just stay awake because I don't want to fall asleep and move, right? But still, I'm trying to breathe really shallow and comfortably, so that I don't start to hyperventilate or anything. And all of these spacey sounds start coming in. There's the and then a little bit later there's like woo, woo, woo. So there's all these weird sounds. I'm like, okay, so I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, so this is a science fiction movie that I'm in. I just didn't know it. So I'm starting to picture in my head all of this stuff. And so, for those of you who are a Calvin and Hobbes fan, I was the girl version of Spaceman Smith. Okay, so, in these battles and all of this stuff. And so I'm actually feeling pretty calm. And so we got most of the way through. And the tech realized he never turned on the music because they have music to help block out the sound. So then all of a sudden I start getting this very odd music coming in, which completely destroyed my fantasy that I had going. So when he stopped it and then pulled me out to put the contrast in, which he couldn't find a vein, so he had to go through my hand, which is never comfortable. I asked him to turn off the music, but it took a long time to get that through to him because I was trying to not scream at somebody because I can't hear him with headphones and plugs and all that. And so he finally got it and turned it off like another 5 minutes in on the second part. So it's just like, okay. So then I tried to get my zen back and it just never worked. But overall, it went fine. Come to find out, there is some white and gray matter in there, and there's nothing that's not supposed to be in there, which is a very good thing. So that was just from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Monday. So by the time I got home, it's like I'd had my whole week's worth of things not going right. And so my husband was like, okay, well, we could pretend it's Friday, but the people you're seeing tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday might have a little bit of a problem with that. So everything is fine. I'm seeing everybody. It won't be a problem. I'm going in for other testing for other issues, but all in all, everybody here is fine. Nobody's ill, nobody has COVID, nobody has any other problems. So most of the stuff I'm doing is just all those little niggling things that you ignore for a long time. This year we kind of upped our insurance coverage so that I could try to get some of these things dealt with. So that's all it is. So anyway, I'm perfectly fine. So for those of you who sent me texts or anything that said that you know you want to be kept up to date, you're up to date. And there's nothing to worry about. Okay? Anyway, so because the last couple weeks have been so busy, I have not advanced things on either the green or the blue quilt since I was here last time. I am going to have it all set up so that we can finish those up as much as possible next time. I will get behind my wall, I will find the red fabric and have it cut. And so I don't know that I'll actually have it sewn on, I doubt it. But I'll have it spaced in over here so that you'll be able to see kind of what this is going to look like in its final iteration, and then we'll go ahead and we'll sew it together. So I don't know that we're going to do any sewing today. It's there's only 10 minutes left in our hour. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to assume that there aren't any. If you have any questions, now's your time, or if you have a story you want to share, feel free. If you haven't already, and you're enjoying the craziness that is Maria and Stash Blasters, I do ask you to please subscribe and like even maybe today's episode. And then if you hit the bell, they will alert you when I post videos. Now, I haven't posted any in the last couple of weeks. I'm working on getting some finished up, but it has been kind of zany here with the company. So I'm a little bit behind on that. I have not forgotten I'm working on them. They're just not quite done. I do have the tutorial that I'm working on for the StashBlaster quilt. The only piece I need to add now is the fabric requirements so that it's all in the one video. If you're interested, the StashBlaster quilts are available on StashBlaster.com. It's #1, and I understand right now it's the only one, but it's the #1, and I have more that are already done. I just have to get the videos done and the patterns completed. They're in process as well. But it's the #1. It is free. It is free for you to use for charity quilts. It is free for you to use for guilds. It is free for you to use as a fundraiser. Basically, if you want to make this beastie behind me in any shade or iteration that you want to, go for it. You have my permission. The future will also include another video that'll be related to StashBlaster 1 on alternate settings and other quilts that you can make out of the strip sets that make this one. But that's a little bit further down the line because I want to get 1, 2, and 3 done, patterned, and available for you prior to worrying about that. For those of you that haven't been around the whole time, just so you have an idea, I will show you what #2 looks like. This is StashBlaster #2's block. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this one is going to use strips at least 2.5 inches wide. This one, I do have one 2.5 inch wide strip here, but all the rest are much smaller. These are 1 inch raw, so they finish at 1/2, but you could use any size that you want. You can make this block any size that you want. That's the idea behind the StashBlasters, is that they're incredibly adaptable for what you have in your drawer that you want to get rid of. I want this to be something where the StashBlaster line is for when you've processed the fabric like we talked about today, and now your drawer doesn't close. So now you need something to do with the fabric that's ready to go, that's going to give you a quilt that's not just 10-inch squares, or it's not just giant strips, or it's not something like that. Now those are fine quilts, don't get me wrong, and I don't disparage them at all. But if you want to do something that's a little bit more, this is your next step up. And as a beginning quilter, these are all designed to be extremely easy. Just like when I was talking about before and adding that sashing in, It means you don't have to match any seams. You don't have to get all fussy about it. The idea is that you're going to be able to be very successful doing this, even new. Even if this is your first quilt, you'll be able to do it and you won't have to worry. Okay? If you ever have any questions or problems, you are welcome to email me at mail@stashblasterquilts.com. You can put notes here in the comments. I didn't have any emails or notes this time, but in the past I've gotten emails and then I talk about those things in the next live. The lives are the first and third Wednesday of every month from 7 to 8. I want to respect your time, so I do want to end at 8 o'clock. But I do take emails and questions afterwards. So I hope you had a good time. And I want this space to be a very friendly, open, give and take. If you have a question, ask it. If you know an answer to a question, then answer it. I want this to be just a very comfortable place to spend a little bit of time with some quilting friends. You're welcome to quilt right along with me, either on the project that I'm doing or your own projects. If you want to send photos to the website, would be happy to look at those and post them and talk about them here. I can even take them and maybe do a little bit of a PowerPoint every once in a while that'll show, hey, these are the projects that some of our people are working on. So share, please. I'm happy to have you. So it's only a couple of minutes of, I think we're going to end those couple minutes early because you don't need to listen to me jabber about this stuff. But have a wonderful couple weeks, and I will see you the third Wednesday of the month when I will have gotten back from Phoenix, where I am going to be teaching a class a week from Monday to the Crisis Intervention Team International Conference. So I will see you then. Take care, and bye-bye. Let's get sewing.